Yeah, I was going to speak not so much on the topic of lending and borrowing and money per se, but rather some of the basic Buddhist insights into what I would call the workings of a healthy economy. And in preparing for this presentation over the past few days, I came across something called the Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality, which publishes a magazine called Pathways, a magazine on poverty, inequality, and social policy. And the particular issue that I looked at, the issue for 2016, compared the economies of a number of countries according to certain criteria, to rank them according to certain criteria. And it turned out that the United States ranks last among 10 affluent countries in terms of wealth inequality and income inequality. It is also at the bottom in terms of the safety net provisions it offers to poor families. It is among the lowest in the opportunities it offers low-income families to rise up from poverty. So it's 8 out of 10. This is what the American dream turns out to be in real practice. And it is 10th, that is the worst in the share of national wealth going to the top 10%, and again worse in the share of national wealth going to the top 1%. Some other figures that I came across is that just over the last few days is that the world's richest 1% owns half the world's wealth. Their share increased from 42% in 2008 to 50% in 2017, while the world's 3.5 billion poorest adults own just 2.7% of global wealth. So these are some statistics, and we could say that the United States, despite all of its promises, or all of its self-congratulations, turns out to be a society that's with an economy beset by extremes of inequality. And I reflect from a Buddhist point of view of what underlies the workings of this economy, as exemplified by the United States, but in other economies around the world. And it seems to me, though we speak about the market operating as a self-sufficient, autonomous force, but what underlies this, I would say, is a certain set of unconsciously adopted philosophical tenets which operate at a very deep psychological level. We could call this the underlying source code of the global economy, but reaching its maximum operation in the United States. So these philosophical tenets involve what I would call first an ontology, which is the assumption that each individual exists as a self-sufficient, autonomous, atomistic entity, which is pitted in irreconcilable competition with other individuals who are also autonomous, self-sufficient, self-enclosed, atomistic entities. So that is the ontological basis. Then on that basis emerges a theory of value, which is that the value of life is to enhance the status, the position, the power, and the wealth of that atomistic individual, the individual self, by accumulating as much wealth as possible, using that wealth to establish one's claims to power, and then the sort of cycle, using that power that comes through wealth to intensify, to enhance, to increase one's own wealth. So this becomes a kind of vicious cycle. And then the application of this program, we could say the sort of ethic, and I use that word in quotation marks, is that rational action is action intended to enhance one's wealth and power, even when doing so comes at the expense of others, to the detriment of others. So I say those are the underlying premises or principles which are sort of unconsciously adapted or adopted by the people who are at the helm of the world economy. and which functions at a very deep unconscious level. And what is rather ironic is that there have been studies, particularly by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Packard, I think the name is, or Pickett. Their famous book is called The Spirit Level, which shows that societies in which there's a greater degree of economic equality are happier and healthier than societies in which there are extremes of economic inequality. So some of the factors which contribute to this happiness, that in unequal society there's more stress and anxiety, whereas and more mental illness because of the stress and anxiety. And yet within a more equal society, there's more people are more comfortable, more at ease, and they have more fulfilling relationships with each other. In more unequal societies, there's more crime, property crime, and violent crime, whereas in more equal societies, the level of crime drops. In more equal societies, there's more access for everybody to education, more social mobility, more trust between people, more participation in community activities, more wholesome attitudes, and greater happiness. And so all of this has been pretty well documented, showing the benefits of a more equal society, and yet we remain committed to the tenet that, especially seen with these latest tax proposals, which are going to channel so much of the nation's wealth upwards to the corporations and the CEOs and the ultra-rich people, and disadvantaged people in the middle class and the working class. So this is all pretty much something of a preamble to my presentation. So now I want to come to a Buddhist perspective on a healthy economy. And so the fundamental concept, I would say, of the Buddha's teaching is the concept of what is called Dhamma in Pali, or Dharma in Sanskrit. The word Dhamma signifies an impersonal, universal law of righteousness and truth. It is expected that in a healthy society, people will follow the Dharma in their personal relationships, their relations with one another, which constitutes interpersonal morality, and that society should be organized at the highest levels in accordance with the Dharma, which implies, in this case, righteous government. The Buddha is considered one who discovers the Dharma and then proclaims it and makes it known in its fullness to the world. Though Dharma was a concept which existed in India even before the arising of the Buddha. So it's just what the Buddha's distinctive characteristic, according to the Buddhist tradition, is to discover and to express the Dharma and to express it fully in its multiple manifestations. Okay, the implication of the Dharma for governance, as we'll see, I'm going to be going through some Buddhist texts. The responsibility of government is to promote social and communal harmony, to promote the well-being and happiness of the people. And when it fails to do so, then the government is functioning in a mode that's called adhamma, that's unrighteously contrary to the Dharma. And in that case, it loses its legitimacy. So those in positions of authority, in the Buddhist time, mostly monarchies, kings, are expected to regulate their own conduct by the Dharma and to rule, to administer the country in accordance with the Dharma. And if they violate the Dharma, then their transgressions have repercussions that spread out throughout the entire social order and even affect the working of natural phenomena, so that the seasons become irregular, the changing of the seasons, even the sun and moon don't revolve in their normal orbits. Okay, As far as human interrelationships are concerned, the concept of Dharma extols as the supreme values governing human relationships loving kindness and compassion. This is in Pali, metta and karuna. Loving kindness is the wish to promote the well-being and happiness of others. Compassion is the wish to remove the suffering of others. And it's the responsibility of the government to administer the country in accordance with the decrees of loving kindness and compassion. Okay, now I want to turn to some specific texts. You have them in your folder, and
have a copy
they're
of
being projected onto the screen as well. So I'm in a position right now where I can't read the screen, and I didn't bring it with me. Okay, so I will try to go rather quickly through some of these texts. Okay, one sort of major thrust in the Buddha's teaching, which would contribute to a more just economic order, is what I call a critique of greed. The Buddha enumerates three mental factors which are considered the akusala mula, that is the unwholesome roots, the underlying psychological roots of all unwholesome behavior. The three unwholesome roots are greed, hatred, and delusion or ignorance. And so here I've compiled a few texts which explain the dangers and the defects of greed. So we see that greed as an unwholesome root is said to lead to unwholesome conduct of body, speech, and mind. Impelled by greed, a person inflicts suffering upon others. And then thinking, I am powerful, I want power, a person will kill, imprison, fine, censor others, or if in a position of authority, banish others. And then there's a verse which says, this is interesting to me, that a greedy person does not know the good. A greedy person does not see the truth. And when I reflect on those who are in positions of extreme wealth, and they're always manipulating to increase their wealth, putting pressure on Congress, manipulating the financial system, and yet it seems rather puzzling. If one has $1 billion, $2 billion, why does one need $3, $4, $5 billion? Isn't it just a kind of addiction to abstract concepts? One will never make use of that wealth. And by channeling that wealth from others to one's own account, one is creating tremendous harm and suffering for others. And so in this way, a greedy person does not even know his or her own good. Okay, then we have some things, 9 things rooted in craving. You can read that on your own. I'll have to go through to some of the other points. Okay, now in the traditional Buddhist society, the Buddhist community will be divided into 2 sectors, the monastics, monks and nuns, and the lay community. And according to the ideal, which I must confess is often violated in practice, monastics are to live and to pursue an ideal of contentment, to be content with the simplest requisites, with sufficient robes, alms food, the dwelling place, medicines, and a few other basic necessities. And so when a society venerates, esteems those who are serving as models of contentment, that influence should spread down to the rest of the society and inculcate an attitude of contentment amongst the people at large. Even though it's not expected that people in household life are going to be content with the simplest requisites, but this is presented to them as the spiritual ideal. Okay, but when we come to the householder, we have a text, I have the text here, number 3. It said that when a good person is born into this world, it's for the good welfare and happiness of many people. So the householder should be providing for his parents, wife and children, the servants and workers in the household, friends and companions, and then for the renunciants, the ascetics and Brahmins. Okay, the Buddha, in another sutta, he explains different ways of acquiring wealth, acquiring material wealth. He uses different criteria, and then he explores them into different permutations until we come to the last one, the one that the Buddha will extol as the best, and that is a householder who seeks wealth righteously in accordance with right livelihood. Without violence, he makes himself happy and pleased, shares it, and does meritorious deeds. But without being infatuated with that wealth, seeing the drawbacks and attachment to wealth, and understanding the escape. So this one, the Buddha says, is the foremost of those who acquire wealth. The Buddha also speaks of different types of wealth. Usually we think of wealth just as monetary wealth, but the Buddha, in a number of discourses, he speaks of 7 kinds of wealth. So this shows that there's spiritual wealth, which should complement and even has greater value than material wealth. So the 7 kinds of spiritual wealth are faith, virtue or good conduct, moral shame, moral dread, the wealth of learning, generosity, and wisdom. Okay, then there's a sutta where the Buddha speaks about the proper use of wealth. So again, it's wealth that's acquired righteously by energetic striving. Again, one makes one's household, oneself and one's household happy and maintains them in security. One uses another portion to share with one's friends, to make one's friends happy and pleased. One uses another portion of the wealth as a kind of insurance against calamities. One uses another portion for what are called the 5 oblations, including taxes to the government. And then with the 5th portion of wealth, one uses that to practice generosity, to make donations, especially for the support of those who are living lives of renunciation. I'm going to skip over so that I get to some important ones. Okay, then another value which is emphasized strongly by the Buddha as a way of sort of disseminating wealth throughout society is the practice of generosity. And so the Buddha says that the disciple dwells at home with a mind free from the stain of self-miserliness, freely generous, delighting in relinquishment, devoted to charity, to giving and sharing. And amongst the various kinds of gifts, he especially extols the gift of food. Okay, the practice of generosity is a way of sharing wealth at the level of interpersonal relations, or at the individual or ethical level. But the Buddha also teaches that the government has the responsibility of ensuring that there's no poverty within the realm. The Buddha speaks about the ideal ruler. He calls him the Chakravarti Raja, which means the wheel-turning monarch. This is described as a just and righteous king who governs in dependence on the basis of the Dharma, this universal law of righteousness and truth. Okay, and so one of the responsibilities, I'm now in text 11, of the wheel-turning monarch is to provide lawful protection, shelter, and safety for everyone in his realm, even the beasts and the birds. And then one of the responsibilities of the monarch is to ensure that there is no crime in his kingdom and to give wealth to those in need. And the Buddha relates a legend about a lineage of wheel-turning monarchs who succeed each other through 7 generations, and the 7th king in this generation followed the other stipulations laid down for the wheel-turning monarch, but he did not give wealth to the needy. And as a result, poverty became rife in his realm. From the growth of poverty, theft increased. With the increase of theft, then the use of weapons increased. In the United States, we have spread of guns everywhere these days. Then from the increased use of weapons, murder increased, lying increased, and all sorts of moral violations increased. And so this traces sort of the root of all disasters and harm within a country to the rise of poverty. And poverty arises when the government is not fulfilling its responsibility to ensure that everybody is able to enjoy a satisfactory standard of living. This would be probably in today's terms the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. Okay, then there is a sutta, again illustrating this point, where a Brahmin came to the Buddha and asked about performing a sacrifice. And then the Buddha relates a legend about a king in the past, the distant past, who wanted to perform a sacrifice because his realm was infested with brigands and thieves, and he thought by performing a sacrifice he could cause the calamities to subside. But his advisor, his chaplain, told him that if you were to tax this region to get money in order to perform the sacrifice, that would be the wrong thing to do. What you should do, the chaplain said, to those in this kingdom who are engaged in cultivating crops and raising cattle, you should give grain and fodder. To those who are involved in trade, give them capital. To those in civil service, give proper wages. And in this way, the people, being intent on their own occupations, will not harm the kingdom. Your revenues will increase. The land will be tranquil. Thieves and brigands will vanish. And then the people, with joy in their hearts, playing with their children, will dwell in open houses. I think I've come to my time limit, so I don't want to go beyond that. But on the handout, this might seem like an extremely idealized picture of the monarch, but in Buddhist history we have one monarch who endeavored to fulfill that ideal of the wheel-turning monarch, and that is Emperor Ashoka of India. And I included some quotations from his edicts in the handout. Okay, so thank you very much. And